What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So as part of the FTC Microsoft Activision Blizzard hearing that is currently ongoing, more and more information is being revealed through way of filings, and some of these filings appear to show us all of the different acquisition targets that Microsoft had lined up, and it actually seems to confirm several rumors over the past couple of years. We'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a bit of a reveal for an upcoming Nintendo game that has people wondering just how big this title is going to be. And we'll also be talking about Perfect Dark, which was revealed back in 2020 and doesn't look like we should be expecting this one anytime soon. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're gonna start today with Pikmin 4 as some of the final previews went live yesterday. Remember, there is a demo that is coming up on the 28th, so we'll at least be able to try out some of the game ahead of its July 21st release. Anyway, through some of these previews, we did learn some new information around it, but the biggest thing that I've seen looking around at all the different previews, they're all incredibly positive, and I will admit, if you're a Pikmin fan, you're probably just happy that Pikmin 4 exists in the first place, but after looking at it myself, who's not the biggest Pikmin fan, I will be checking this game out. I mean, it's in July when it's going to be, not really, I guess, quiet period, because catching up on some of these 2023 releases in the first place is going to be hard enough, but I'm curious what the Pikmin craze is really all about after I did play Pikmin on the GameCube, but now seeing Pikmin 4, which should be the culmination of the entire series, and seeing, I would say, a big addition with Ochi, and a lot of stuff when it comes to progression, leveling up, and some of the adventure aspects, especially in the caves or the underground part. Yeah, I'm interested. So, based on some of the previews and the demo coming up, I'll be, I guess, checking out Pikmin 4 and picking it up on July 21st when it releases. But make sure you check out some of the previews for yourself if you've been curious about Pikmin, and seems like if you haven't played any of the previous ones, you should be able to jump into Pikmin 4 as your first one without many issues. Also, while we've been hearing about all these rumors that SEGA is indeed looking to revive some of their older intellectual properties such as Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio, a few others have been brought up in interviews. For example, we can see this with VGC, where they talked to Takashi Lizuka, this at the Summer Game Fest event, asking about Knights, which, okay, that's interesting. We'll see if that one comes out back. And Burning Rangers. They replied, "I can't say yes to anything right now. These days, I'm the creative officer for Sonic the Hedgehog, so I'm totally focused on that side of the business. So I can't really speak for anyone else, but Sonic Team in Japan has been ramping up and hiring lots of people recently. They have more people than ever, so there may be some future where you'll be hearing about these kinds of titles." So I know we had a Knights game, obviously, on the Saturn, and then we had one on the Wii. Burning Rangers, I mean, good luck. We really haven't seen much of that necessarily. But the thing that's interesting about that scenario is because the newer generation that's been coming in, these games being much older, these intellectual properties, you can revitalize them and recreate them however you would like, and then present them all over again, almost like it's the first time for them. And with how much technology has evolved since these original titles and something like the Sega Saturn, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. So I would like to see Sega go back to their older library, their classic games at this point, and try to reinvent them and bring them up to current times, because especially with Knights, I think there's some pretty cool things you could do with some of the newer systems. Oh, and we do have another gaming showcase coming up to look forward to. This from Bandai Namco, we can see over on Komatsu, where they say Bandai Namco will share exciting announcements and game reveals during its Bandai Namco Summer Showcase at Anime Expo 2023. This is on July 1st, 4:30 p.m. Pacific or 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and they have a few things outlined here, things like for Naruto, Sandland, Sword Art Online, Batten Kaitos, and more. I am curious, as they do mention game reveals and exciting announcements, if this is where we can expect the Elden Ring expansion that's supposed to be fairly large. But otherwise, I don't think Dragon Ball Tenkaichi 4 will be there. It seems like when they announced it, earlier this year, that it was basically in like early development, and it's still going to be a little while before we have that one come out. But definitely keep an eye on Bandai Namco this weekend to see what they have. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Microsoft and some of these filings that are being made public as part of that FTC Microsoft hearing that is centering completely around Activision Blizzard. And if Microsoft should be allowed to spend nearly $70 billion to acquire them. And time is ticking right now, as apparently third week of July, they're going to have to decide to either renegotiate or pay Activision Blizzard a $3 billion breakup fee, essentially. And FTC seems to be attempting to push everything to August for another trial. But if Microsoft can convince that it's really unnecessary, they may be able to close this deal up before that third week of July and then figure things out with the CMA later on. So, as part of this, we are getting a lot of emails, and some of them don't exactly play into Microsoft's favor, like this, for example. You can see posted up by Tom Warren at The Verge from Matt Booty in an email saying, "We, Microsoft, are in a very unique position to be able to go spend Sony out of business. Sony is really the only other player who could compete with Game Pass, and we have a 2-year and 10 million subs lead." Yeah, so when you say stuff like that in an email, that you're going to go out and basically try to spend enough money to knock Sony out of business, it's not really going to help you in a case where you're trying to be third place and appear extremely weak, but we got the money to outspend them and knock them out. But this, to be fair, was an email in 2019. Matt Booty has retorted saying that, hey, plans changed. We're not doing this, except we're also going to buy Activision Blizzard for $70 billion. All right, and to go on from here, things started to get pretty interesting when another email came out. Again, all this stuff was released, so people are going through this, and news is breaking constantly right now. But this from The Verge: Microsoft considered acquiring Bungie and SEGA to bolster Xbox Game Pass, internal emails shown. I will tell you this. I definitely heard it like 2 years ago. We've talked about this at the podcast, joking other times. You can back and look. Yeah, SEGA has been talked about before. And I mean, this is the email showing it, with Phil Spencer actually typing this out, sending it to Satya Nadella and Amy Hood, the CEO and CFO at Microsoft, kind of explaining the position, what they would exactly do here with SEGA, and how they would go about attempting to acquire them, essentially talking to Sega Sammy over their revenue and if they can acquire their game studios and division. Now, to go along with SEGA and Bungie, we're starting to see more and more studios and publishers be discovered in these documents. For example, Tweaktown found like 100 that were at least put on a list for them to keep an eye on and research more of. And you can see a list here of all of them. Bungie at the top there, CD Projekt Red, Certain Affinity, which I still think Certain Affinity could get acquired, although we'll actually be talking about them in a bit in another topic. Crytek, 4A Games, Digital Extremes, From Software, which makes it a little harder because Sony does own a minor share stake. That'd be interesting, right? If Microsoft and Sony both own From Software in some way. Gearbox, Hello Games, IO Interactive, that's another one that was kind of discussed a little bit there. Larian, People Can Fly, Remedy, Starbreeze, and Techland. As for publishers, 505 Games, Focus Home Interactive, Paradox, and Sega. Now, I do think it is important to mention that if you're a large company like Microsoft and you're looking to spend billions and billions of dollars, you're probably going to do something as basic as, let's make a list of all of the studios and publishers we should keep an eye on, not necessarily, let's make a list of everyone we're going to buy. There's pros and cons to all these situations. For example, Bungie, which obviously Sony acquired Bungie, but NetEase having a large investment there, I think about $100 million for a game that was being developed, was kind of a hang-up that at least was discussed. But Sega and at least Bungie, they were definitely discussed heavily within Microsoft. Even Phil Spencer typing up that entire email. I don't really know what happened there because, I mean, clearly this was an email from 2020. Seems like if it was going to happen, it would have, but I feel like when Activision Blizzard became available and they realized this, a lot of things probably went on hold and they started to figure out how they would put the pieces together for a $70 billion deal. But I still think that if they get this done and Activision Blizzard goes through, that Microsoft will probably keep shopping around. I think Certain Affinity is probably going to get acquired by Microsoft, especially if they come through with what apparently they're working on for Halo Infinite. But at this time, yeah, there really were talks of Microsoft buying Sega, and they must have been serious enough to go to Satya Nadella and Amy Hood over it, which means all those rumors that we were joking about with Sega years ago, weren't necessarily rumors. Next up, let's talk about Perfect Dark, which is a game that was officially revealed at the Game Awards 2020. So at the end of this year, it'll have been 3 years since it was first shown that the initiative was working on a reboot for Perfect Dark. And we haven't seen it since, which has brought up a lot of questions. And turns out, yeah, there's a reason we haven't seen this game for a little while now, and we can see this posted up over on IGN. They had an entire article and report on this, and I encourage you to go read through this because there's a lot of very interesting behind-the-scenes information here. But we can see they say, the project, that being Perfect Dark, has seen roadblock after roadblock with problems such as a fraught co-development partnership, a pandemic, technological challenges, an ongoing exodus of significant talent, and unclear direction for management, keeping the game in development limbo. And while a new partnership with Crystal Dynamics appears to finally be bearing fruit, multiple sources who have worked on the game recently say that Perfect Dark is still in the earliest stages of development, estimating that it is roughly 2 to 3 years away from being ready for release. I'm going to estimate holiday 2026 for Perfect Dark is what I would expect here at this time, and if it comes sooner, great, it'll be a nice surprise. But it does appear there have been a lot of issues in development for this one, and I would go as far as to say that it's very similar to what Nintendo dealt with or is dealing with for Metroid Prime 4, where both projects appear to be back on track and at least are developing smoothly now. But earlier on, I mean, they even had a deal where they were working next to Certain Affinity for Perfect Dark, but it just wasn't working out between what the initiative was trying to do and what Certain Affinity was able to do, whether it's the initiative trying to bounce ideas off of them and Certain Affinity being just so far ahead in terms of the development of their overall studio, whereas the initiative was still hiring on and just trying to figure out their own studio culture. And you take that, compound it with the heavy turnover that appeared to have been happening at the initiative, it just didn't work out. So Certain Affinity was then moved out, and then we have Crystal Dynamics come in, who apparently have just taken the reins completely on this project. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for Crystal Dynamics to basically be taking over with the initiative, of course working alongside of them, because Crystal Dynamics will at least get games out. Like, they have a lot of experience finishing titles, and obviously they did the Tomb Raider. I know they did Marvel's Avengers. That didn't necessarily work out, but I think that was more or less a leadership and vision thing with what we saw Square wanting out of it, as opposed to what Crystal Dynamics was at least able to develop there on the ground floor. So I'm hoping Perfect Dark comes out the other end in good shape and is a really fun title, because I think it's an important reboot for Microsoft to really get right. But I also think it's probably going to be 3 years minimum that we see it. So we'll shoot for holiday 2026 and see where we are then with the initiative, Crystal Dynamics, and Perfect Dark. Next up, let's talk about a big release for Nintendo for the holiday season, and that's Super Mario Bros. Wonder. 2D Mario games typically sell very, very well for Nintendo, and a lot of times will outsell the 3D Mario counterpart. So in that case, I guess Super Mario Bros. Wonder could top 20, 25 million fairly easily. We'll see. Has at least the Mario movie going for it, which has driven a ton of interest and even more brand awareness for Mario, if that's even possible. But we did have a reveal on the eShop for this game, and that specifically has to do with file size. Now, I do want to say, I think people tend to read a bit too much into the file size side of things with some of these games, considering we're not necessarily there in the trenches developing these different titles and have that kind of knowledge of it. But because we did get the file size, people started comparing to other games. So let's take a look. This posted up over on the Super Mario Bros. Wonder page. Before we get to the file size, though, I do want to point out that the number of players is single system 1 to 4. So at this time, it does not appear that there's any online multiplayer, but I guess things can update or change as we get closer. However, the file game size, 4.5 gigabytes. Now, in the world of 100 gigabyte plus titles, that seems absolutely tiny. That might be a day one patch size that you would expect for some of these other games, maybe even half of that, really. But people started comparing it to new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. That is the port, of course, that they decided not even take the U out of. But that one comes in at 2.5 gigabytes. So naturally, people are looking at this saying, wow, it's almost twice the size. Could that mean it's almost twice the game? Is that possible? Well, Probably not really necessarily, I'd say. I mean, the thing is really impressive to me because, of course, comparisons also were drawn to Mario Odyssey. That game being only 5.6 gigabytes is probably the most impressive thing here. If you look at another 2D game, Metroid Dread is 4.3 gigabytes in size, so I would look at this and say Super Mario Bros. Wonder probably has, I mean, the audio typically ends up being a large portion of the file size, but also the texture work, animation, visual. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and I think we can all look at this and then look at New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe and realize this is like a massive step up over the previous one that, again, was a port from the Wii U. But I'm excited for Super Mario Bros. Wonder and looking forward to picking it up on the same day as Spider-Man 2 and potentially 3 days after the new 2D Sonic game, being Sonic Superstars. Definitely a packed time there in October. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Alan Wake 2. Specifically, the fact that it will only release as a digital game. There will be no physical release, not even a code in a box. Apparently, they just don't want to deal with any of the publishing and logistics of getting these things out to store shelves. They've given a few reasons. One being, hey, we can make the price cheaper. And I mean, hey, they are. It's not like this is a $70 game and it's just digital. They have marked the price down a bit, so I guess there's that. But I would like to see this game on a disc. Sure, preservation, collectors, whatever. But Alan Wake 2, I like the first one. Would love to have this one on a disc, have it next to Alan Wake 1 on the shelf. But This is an odd one. Take a look. This posted up over on Eurogamer, and they were talking at Summer Game Fest with the Alan Wake 2's creative director Sam Lake and game director Kyle Rowley, giving a bit more reasoning behind why they're going this route, saying, yeah, it's digital only, and kind of coming to this idea both from Remedy and Epic's perspective. That's our current thinking. It just felt it makes sense for this, and the timing felt right. As creatives, obviously, by going digital only, it does allow us more time to polish the game, like a significant amount of weeks actually, because otherwise the game that goes on the disc, obviously, it has to be playable without a patch. We didn't want to release something that we weren't proud of basically, and that we didn't want players to play. So hopefully this way we can give you a better version of the game. So the reason this doesn't make a lot of sense is if you just want the game to be better and you're not comfortable with what you would ship on the disc, you delay the game? To me, that seems obvious. I guess in terms of money and the runway that they have and how much they're burning right now, maybe they've done the math and they're like, well, we can't delay this game. So we don't have to worry about having a build ready to go, as they say, like a month or more even, to put on a disc. We can work almost up to 0 hour, I guess, or it won't matter because if it's digital only. The day one patch will most likely just be part of it because they typically get pushed out before the game releases. So you'll download the game with the day one patch already included and not even realize it. But to me, if you look at where Alan Wake 2 is releasing now, here's the schedule, which we just talked about October being packed, but this is on Game Rant, who just kind of lists them here. So October 10th is Forza Motorsport, then 2 days later, Assassin's Creed Mirage, then Lord of the Fallen, then Alan Wake 2. We believe at this time Sonic Superstars is going to release on the same day. Marvel Spider-Man 2, 3 days later. Super Mario Bros. Wonder, also 3 days later. You have City Skylines 2, Metal Gear Solid Master Collection, Alone in the Dark. What I'm saying is that's already a packed time. So people are thinking, well, it actually wouldn't be a bad idea to delay the game out. Although they probably want to get the game out there so they can start selling copies and making money. I'm trying to figure out if this is going to become more of a trend going forward, because when we saw Starfield, at least some of the information get out there that it might not have a disc. People weren't necessarily as surprised by it. And who knows, maybe in 3 or 4 years, it'll be surprising to have a game release as a disc. I don't know, we'll see. Especially as we get towards the end of this generation, I'm going to be very, very curious if the next systems from Microsoft and Sony have a Blu-ray drive at all. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, do you like 2D Sonic games or 2D Mario games more? 77% say 2D Mario games. I figured Mario would win pretty handily. I was just curious what the split would be. 2D Sonic games, though, 23%. Not bad. Back in the 90s, I mean, this would have been probably a 50-50 split. I wouldn't have been shocked, by the way, if Sonic overtook Mario in the polls. It would have been very possible, at least back in the 90s. Now, though, I get it. Nintendo has shown time and time again that they put out high-quality releases, especially for the 2D Mario side, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder looks really, really compelling from that 2D side, and I'm just curious what exactly they have in store for us, especially with the flowers that just mess up the entire level and send Mario through like a psychedelic trip or something. It's gonna be some fun stuff, I think, but Sonic Superstars also looks really good. That's gonna be a fun week in October. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Meta. Says, I would love to watch this lawsuit take place in real time. This sounds like absolute insanity. You can, actually. There's a Zoom link that I believe gets posted up, and you can just kind of sit there, be a fly on the wall, and observe exactly what's going on with the questioning between the FTC and I think like Satya Nadella is expected to be coming up here soonish. And I know today they resume 8:30 a.m. Pacific or 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, but it can kind of be dry and boring at times, and they have to pause things depending on if there's confidential information in a testimony. You may be better off following someone like Tom Warren, for example, on Twitter, who is doing like a play-by-play of the hearing and more of the interesting bits of information that get out there. But yeah, we'll see what they have for us this week, and then actually by the end of this week, we should have, I believe, our closing arguments, and we can see where it goes from there for Microsoft and the FTC over Activision Blizzard. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, where there's the entire situation with the filings getting out there showing that Microsoft was really looking around at just about everyone, and even SEGA was a serious consideration. Also, what about the Super Mario Bros. Wonder file size? Think people are reading too much into that, or do you think it's going to be a bit larger than people were expecting? And then Perfect Dark sounds like it's going to be a while before we see it, but realistically, when do you expect it to come out? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.